While my mother-in-law was busy helping my husband's mistress pick out a designer dress with my money, I was quietly canceling the black cards she worshipped. She had no idea that the luxury villa, the fleet of supercars, and her entire lavish lifestyle were about to vanish with a single phone call. My name is Brooklyn. I am 30 years old, and I am a bankruptcy attorney who knows exactly how to make a financial empire crumble to dust. Before I continue, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to deal with a family that mistook your silence for weakness. The air inside the Hermes boutique on Fifth Avenue was thick with the scent of expensive leather and entitlement. I stood hidden behind a rack of silk scarves, my heart hammering against my ribs as I heard a voice that had haunted my marriage for 5 years. It was Evelyn, my mother-in-law. She wasn't alone. She was with Tiffany, a 24-year-old aspiring influencer who had been sleeping with my husband Mark for the last 6 months. You should definitely get the Birkin in rose azalea. Tiffany Evelyn chirped, her voice dripping with a fake sweetness she never showed me. It suits your complexion perfectly. Don't worry about the $25,000 price tag. Mark will handle it. My pathetic daughter-in-law is so busy playing trash collector for failed businesses that she never even looks at the credit card statements. She's just a glorified janitor in a suit. Tiffany giggled, running her manicured nails over the gold hardware of the bag. Are you sure Evelyn Brooklyn might notice a charge this big? Evelyn let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed through the quiet store. That girl? She's a mouse. We've been using her family's trust fund to fuel this lifestyle for years, and she's too desperate for our approval to ever say a word. She's lucky we even let her keep the family name. I felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over me. For years, I had been the one saving Mark's failing tech startup. I had used my inheritance to pay off his gambling debts and keep his mother in her high society circles. In their eyes, I wasn't a partner. I was an ATM with a law degree. I stepped out from behind the display, my heels clicking sharply on the polished floor. The color drained from Evelyn's face so fast I thought she might faint. "Brooklyn," she stammered, clutching her pearls. What a surprise. We were picking out a gift for a friend. I didn't look at her. I looked at the bag Tiffany was holding like a trophy. It's a beautiful bag, Tiffany. It's just a shame you'll never own it. I pulled my phone from my bag and dialed the private concierge line for my American Express Centurion account. I didn't whisper. I wanted the sales associates and the other socialites browsing the store to hear every word. Yes, this is Brooklyn Vance, I said, my voice steady and cold. I need to report a security breach on my secondary cards. Please cancel the card ending in 8888 immediately. Yes, right now. I also want to decline every pending transaction from the last hour. Thank you. The sales associate's iPad chimed almost instantly. I watched Tiffany's face turn from smug to horrified as the employee approached them with an apologetic but firm expression. I'm so sorry, ma'am, but this transaction has been declined by the bank. I'll need you to return the bag. The silence in the boutique was deafening. Evelyn looked like she wanted to crawl into a hole. Brooklyn, how dare you embarrass me like this? She hissed, her eyes darting around to see who was watching. You have no idea what you've just done. I leaned in close, catching the scent of her expensive Chanel perfume. No, Evelyn, I know exactly what I've done. I've just stopped paying for the air you breathe. I turned and walked out of the store, leaving them to deal with the whispers of the New York elite. As I got into my car, the adrenaline was still surging. I drove away from Manhattan, heading toward our estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. The house sat on 4 acres of prime real estate, a colonial masterpiece, with a 6-car garage and a guest house. It was the house where Mark had promised to build a life with me. He had stood in the foyer 5 years ago, holding my hands, promising that my trust fund was safe and that we were a team. He lied. When I arrived, I didn't go inside. I parked at the end of the long driveway and waited for my brother-in-law, Jordan. Jordan was married to my younger sister, but he was more than family. He was a former NYPD detective turned private investigator, and he was the only person who knew I was planning to burn Mark's world down. Jordan pulled up in his black SUV, his expression grim. He handed me a thick manila folder through the window. "It's worse than we thought, Brooklyn," he said, his deep voice filled with genuine concern. "Mark isn't just cheating. He's been forging your signature on equity release documents for this house. He's trying to move the title into a shell company controlled by Tiffany's brother." My grip tightened on the folder. "He's trying to steal my home, Jordan. And your mother-in-law is the one who introduced him to the lawyer who's facilitating the paperwork," Jordan added. "They aren't just betrayed you. They're trying to leave you with nothing." I looked up at the house, the sun setting behind the tall oaks. "They think I'm a victim, Jordan. They think because I'm a bankruptcy attorney, I only know how to handle other people's failures. They forgot that I know how to hide assets, track money, and destroy credit scores better than anyone in this state." "Be careful," Brooklyn Jordan warned. "Mark is desperate. When a man like him realizes the money has dried up, he becomes a cornered animal." "I'm not afraid of an animal," I replied. "I'm the one who built the cage." I finally walked into the house an hour later. The lights were all on, and I could hear the muffled sounds of an argument coming from the kitchen. Mark and Evelyn were already there waiting for me. The moment I stepped into the kitchen, the air turned toxic. "What the hell is wrong with you, Brooklyn?" Mark yelled, slamming a glass of scotch down on the marble island. "My mother called me crying from the city. You blocked her cards. You humiliated her in front of her friends." I didn't flinch. I walked to the fridge and poured myself a glass of water. "Her friends were watching her buy a Birkin for your mistress, Mark. I think the humiliation was self-inflicted." Mark's face turned a deep shade of purple. "Tiffany is a business associate, you jealous bitch. And that card belongs to this family. You have no right to cut us off." Evelyn stepped forward, her face twisted in a mask of artificial outrage. "We have sacrificed everything for you, Brooklyn. We gave you a family, a social standing, a name, and this is how you repay us. By acting like a child, you are unstable. I've told Mark for months that your work is getting to your head. Maybe you need to go away for a while to a wellness retreat or a psychiatric ward." The gaslighting was so predictable it was almost boring. They wanted to paint me as the crazy wife so they could take control of my estate. Mark stepped into my personal space, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "You're going to call the bank and you're going to fix this," he growled. "And then you're going to apologize to my mother. If you don't, I'm filing for divorce and I'm taking half of everything you have. I have the documents, Brooklyn. I have the power here." I looked him dead in the eye, my face a mask of perfect, fragile submission. I let a single tear roll down my cheek, playing the part of the broken woman they expected to see. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice trembling just enough. "I just felt so hurt. I'll call the bank in the morning. Please just don't leave me." Mark smirked, exchanging a triumphant look with his mother. "That's what I thought," he said, brushing past me. "Make sure you do. And don't forget the apology." As they walked out of the room laughing about how easily they had handled me, I wiped the tear away. They thought they had won. They didn't realize that by threatening me with divorce, Mark had just given me the legal green light to activate the scorched earth policy I had been preparing for weeks. They didn't know that every word they just said was recorded, or that the documents Mark thought he had were already being flagged as fraudulent by the district attorney's office. I wasn't going to a wellness retreat. I was going to a war room. And by the time I was finished, the only thing Evelyn would be able to afford at Hermes would be a paper bag to hide her face in. I woke up the next morning feeling like a general preparing for the final offensive. Mark was already gone, likely to boast to Tiffany about how he had tamed his rebellious wife. I sat in my home office, the sunlight hitting the mahogany desk that once belonged to my father. He always told me that the best way to catch a wolf is to let it think the sheep has stopped running. I pulled up my banking portal and navigated to the secondary card settings. I didn't just reopen the card. I created a strategic illusion. I set a deceptive credit limit that looked like a fortune on a mobile app, but was actually a ticking time bomb of pre-authorized debt. By 10 a.m., I walked into the kitchen where my mother-in-law Evelyn was sipping an espresso. She didn't even look up. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence hang, until I forced my voice to crack, just a little. Evelyn, I've been thinking about what you said. You're right. I've been so focused on my work that I forgot what it means to be a part of this family. I want to make it up to both of you. Evelyn set her cup down with a sharp clink, her eyes narrowing with predatory interest. Go on, she said, her tone still icy but tinged with curiosity. I took a deep breath. Mark and I have our 10th anniversary coming up. I want to host a gala. Not just a small dinner, but a full weekend at the Little Nell in Aspen. I'll fly everyone out. I want it to be the event of the season. I've already authorized a temporary limit on the cards for the planning phase. Consider it my apology for the scene at the boutique. The transformation was instant. The coldness in her face melted into a greedy glow. Aspen. She mused, her mind already calculating the social capital she would gain. Well, it's a start, Brooklyn. It's a very expensive start. I suppose if you're willing to put in the effort, I can help you manage the guest list. Mark will be pleased to know you've finally come to your senses. As she bustled out of the room to call her tailor, I felt a wave of disgust, but I suppressed it. I had a much more important call to make. I dialed my sister's husband, Jordan, but it was his sister Maya who picked up. Maya was my sister-in-law, a brilliant systems engineer from a prominent African-American family in Atlanta. She was the secret weapon Mark and Evelyn never saw coming. Maya and I had always shared a bond of being the outsiders in this circle of old money pretense. She knew exactly what it felt like to be underestimated by people who thought they were superior just by birthright. Brooklyn. I saw the files Jordan sent over. Maya said, her voice low and focused. I am in. These people are vultures. If they think they can just bleed you dry and toss you aside, they've picked the wrong lawyer to mess with. I need the tech ready for Aspen. Maya, I told her, I want every corner of that hospitality suite covered. I need high-definition audio and cloud-synced video. If they're planning to move against my trust fund during that weekend, I want it caught in 4K. Maya let out a dry, confident laugh. Consider it done. I've got the latest pinhole lenses that look like shirt buttons and floral arrangements. I'll be there under the guise of your event coordinator. They won't even look at me twice. They're too busy staring at their own reflections to notice the person setting up the equipment. Thank you, Maya. This isn't just about the money anymore. It's about the fact that they think I'm too weak to fight back. We're going to give them a masterclass in consequences, Brooklyn, she promised. Later that afternoon, Mark returned home. He was beaming, clearly briefed by his mother. He walked over and tried to put an arm around my shoulder, but I leaned forward to pick up a magazine, avoiding his touch without making it obvious. So Aspen, huh? He said, his voice smug. I knew you'd see reason. It's a big step, Brooklyn, a very expensive one. You sure the trust can handle a gala like that? I smiled at him, the kind of smile that didn't reach my eyes. Mark, for the 10th anniversary of the man who promised to love and cherish me, money is no object. I want everyone to see exactly what our marriage is made of. He didn't catch the double meaning. He just saw a green light to spend. That's my girl, he said, already pulling out his phone to probably text Tiffany the good news. We're going to need a lot of new clothes for a mountain gala. And Mom mentioned she needs a new jewelry set to match the theme. Of course, I said softly. Use the card. That's what it's there for. Over the next week, the house became a whirlwind of greed. I watched as the notifications started rolling in. A $6,000 deposit for a custom tuxedo for Mark. $5,000 for Evelyn's spa treatments and pre-trip fillers. Each notification was a nail in their coffin. They were signing contracts left and right, acting as the primary guarantors for luxury services, thinking they were spending my cash. They had no idea that I had spent the last 72 hours restructuring the trust's liability clauses. Every cent they spent now was being documented as a personal loan from the estate to them, backed by their own future interests in the family company Mark's father had left behind. Maya arrived 3 days before we were set to fly out. She looked stunning and professional, carrying a clipboard and a series of large equipment cases. Mark and Evelyn treated her with the typical dismissive politeness they reserved for service staff. They didn't even ask for her last name. Maya, thank you for coming on such short notice, I said, playing the role of the stressed hostess. Please show Mrs. Vance the floral concepts while I check the catering menu. Maya caught my eye and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. Absolutely, Mrs. Vance. I have some very interesting designs to show you. Some of them are quite, shall we say, immersive. I watched her walk Evelyn through a series of mock-ups, pointing out where the large centerpieces would be placed in the Aspen suite. Evelyn was so busy demanding more peonies and gold leaf that she didn't notice Maya measuring the angles of the room for camera placement. Maya was a ghost in the machine, moving through their lives with a level of technical precision they couldn't even dream of. That night, Mark was late coming home again. I sat in the dark living room watching the security feed on my laptop. He was at a bar in the city with Tiffany. I could see them laughing, her hand on his chest, him showing her something on his phone. Probably the guest list for Aspen. I felt a flicker of the old pain, the sting of being replaced after a decade of loyalty. But it was quickly replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't just losing a husband. I was excise a cancer. The next morning, the packing began. Trunks of designer clothes, fur coats for the mountain air, and enough ego to fill a stadium. Evelyn was in rare form, barking orders at the house staff and complaining that the private jet wasn't the newest model. Mark was distracted, constantly checking his messages. I knew Tiffany would be in Aspen too. They had planned for her to stay at a boutique hotel nearby so they could sneak away during the festivities. They thought they were being so clever. Brooklyn. Are you coming? Mark shouted from the foyer. The car is here. I looked at myself in the mirror one last time. I was wearing a simple, elegant charcoal suit. I looked like a woman who was in control, because for the first time in years, I actually was. I walked down the stairs, my heels echoing in the empty hallway of the house I had built, and they had tried to steal. I'm coming, Mark, I said, a calm smile on my face. I wouldn't miss this for the world. As we drove toward this airport, the conversation in the car was entirely about them. Their plans, their image, their triumph. They talked as if I wasn't even there, or as if I were a minor character in the epic story of their lives. I listened to every word, knowing that Maya already had the servers running. Every boast, every cruel comment about my supposed naivety, and every plan they made to further exploit my finances was being captured. They were walking into a trap lined with gold and velvet. They were so blinded by the glitz of Aspen that they couldn't see the cliff they were about to drive over. And the best part was, they were the ones paying for the gas. I reached into my bag and felt the cold plastic of my own card. Not the fake one I had given them, but the real one that controlled the heart of the empire. By the time we landed in Colorado, the first phase of the legal freeze would be ready to execute. The apology was over. The execution was about to begin. Before I continue, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because the next part of the story is where everything they built starts to catch fire. Let me know in the comments if you have ever had to play nice with someone just to get the evidence you needed to take them down. Stay tuned, because the gala in Aspen is about to become a night they will never forget. The notifications started hitting my phone before I even finished my morning coffee. It was like watching a group of hungry sharks finally catch the scent of blood in the water. First, it was a $12,000 charge at a high-end jewelry boutique in downtown Manhattan. Then a few minutes later, $20,000 at a private aviation firm for a helicopter transport from the airport directly to the resort in Aspen. Evelyn and Tiffany weren't just spending money, they were racing to see who could drain the account faster. They thought they had finally broken me. They thought I was so desperate to keep my crumbling marriage together that I had handed them the keys to the kingdom. What they didn't realize was that every single swipe was being funneled into a very specific legal bucket. In the state of New York, commingling assets during a marriage can be a messy gray area, but personal loans with documented signatures are black and white. Every time Mark signed for one of these charges on their shared app, he was unknowingly signing a promissory note. I had restructured the card's terms of service so that any expenditure over $5,000 not related to primary household utilities was classified as an advance against his future inheritance and a personal liability. I sat at my desk watching the numbers climb. 50,000, 80,000, $110,000 in a single afternoon. Evelyn called me around noon, her voice breathless with excitement. "Brooklyn, dear, I hope you don't mind, but I found the most exquisite diamond tennis necklace that just screamed Aspen Gala. It's a bit of an investment, but as the mother of the host, I have to represent the family name properly. You understand, don't you?" I leaned back in my chair, swirling a pen between my fingers. "Of course, Evelyn. The family name is everything. If you feel it's necessary for the image we are projecting, then by all means go ahead. I want this weekend to be unforgettable for everyone involved." "Oh, it will be," she promised, her tone dripping with a smugness she couldn't hide. "You're finally learning your place, Brooklyn. It's about time you realize that your money is meant to serve this family, not just sit in some dusty trust fund." I hung up and immediately logged the call. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was an accountant for their downfall. By the time they finished their shopping spree, they had purchased 3 custom couture gowns, 2 sets of designer luggage, and a collection of watches that Mark claimed were gifts for his business partners. In reality, I knew they were liquid assets he planned to sell later if things got tight. But he couldn't sell what he didn't legally own. The trap was set perfectly. According to the documents Maya and I had prepared, Mark was now personally liable for nearly $250,000 in unsecured debt. Because he had used the business portal to authorize the charges, he had inadvertently linked his failing tech company's remaining assets to these personal expenditures. He was handing me the company on a silver platter, and he was doing it while laughing behind my back with his mistress. That evening, Mark came home carrying several large shopping bags. He looked more confident than I had seen him in months. He walked over to me and actually kissed my cheek, a gesture that made my skin crawl. "You did good, Brooklyn," he said, tossing his keys on the counter. "Mom is happy, and I managed to secure some high-end gifts for the investors joining us in Aspen. This gala is going to put us back on top." I looked at the bags, seeing the logos of stores I knew were now part of my evidence file. "I'm glad to hear it, Mark. I just want everything to be settled. I've had my assistant send over a few final authorization forms for the Aspen Resort. Just standard liability waivers for the private jet and the mountain activities. Since you're the one managing the logistics, the hotel needs your signature as the primary guarantor." Mark didn't even blink. He snatched the pen from my hand and scribbled his name on the bottom of the 3 pages I placed in front of him. He didn't read the fine print. He never did. If he had, he would have seen the clause stating that he was accepting full personal responsibility for all costs associated with the event, regardless of the trust's status. He was so blinded by the flash of the black card that he signed away his last shred of legal protection. Tiffany was even less careful. She was posting stories on Instagram, showing off her new wardrobe and tagging the locations. She even posted a photo of the helicopter she had booked, with a caption that read, "When the wife pays, the queen stays." My sister-in-law Maya sent me a screenshot of the post with a simple text message. She just gave us the location of the secondary evidence. I've linked her social media metadata to the spending logs. We have them exactly where we want them. As I lay in bed that night, listening to Mark brag on the phone to someone about how he had me wrapped around his finger, I felt a strange sense of peace. The anger that had consumed me at the Hermes store had turned into a cold, clinical focus. I was no longer the woman who wondered why she wasn't enough. I was the woman who was about to prove that she was too much for them to handle. They thought Aspen was going to be their coronation. They thought they were going to spend the weekend parading their victory in my face while I paid the bill. They had no idea that the mountain air was about to get very cold very fast. The direct deposit for the resort's final balance was scheduled to trigger the moment we stepped onto the tarmac in Colorado. And that was the exact moment I would pull the plug on the entire charade. Before I tell you about the flight to Aspen, and the moment Tiffany tried to sit in my seat on the private jet, make sure you let me know in the comments what you would do if you caught your partner using your hard-earned money to fund their double life. Would you confront them immediately, or would you wait, like I did, to make sure they lost everything? Hit that like button and stay tuned, because the next chapter is where the masks finally start to slip, and the true cost of their greed becomes crystal clear. We are heading to the mountains, and I can promise you, not everyone is coming back with their reputation intact. After Mark and his mother laughed at me in the living room and went to bed, I sat alone in the dark library of our Connecticut estate. The moonlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows over the rows of leather-bound books and hitting the portrait of my father that hung above the fireplace. My father, Silas Vance, was a legend in New York real estate. He was a man who built skyscrapers out of sheer will and steel. Mark always thought I was just a quiet lawyer who spent her days buried in dry paperwork, but he forgot whose blood flows through my veins. My father taught me the most important lesson of my life, right here in this room when I was 12 years old. He told me, Brooklyn, never let your enemies know how many bullets you have in your gun. Keep them guessing and let them think you are empty until the moment you pull the trigger for the final time. Mark walked into my life when my father's firm was at its absolute peak. He was charming, polished, and played the part of the self-made tech entrepreneur perfectly. I was grieving and vulnerable, and I fell for the facade. But after my father passed away, the mask began to slip. Mark and his mother Evelyn saw my inheritance as a bottomless gold mine, meant to fund their every whim. For the past 5 years, Mark has been secretly siphoning funds from our joint accounts and using my family's trust to prop up his failing software company. He thinks I am too busy dunning bankrupt debtors to notice the missing millions. He thinks he is a genius because he managed to hide his tracks behind shell companies and offshore transfers. What Mark doesn't know is that he isn't playing against a mouse. He is playing against the person who wrote the book on financial forensics. I didn't just notice the money was gone, I tracked every single wire transfer back to its source. While Mark was out buying jewelry for Tiffany, or paying for Evelyn's expensive retreats, I was quietly buying up the distressed debt of his own company through a private equity group I control. Mark doesn't realize that his technology firm, the one thing he values more than our marriage, is now almost entirely owned by me. He isn't a CEO. He is an employee in a company I have the power to liquidate with a single signature. I reached out and touched the mahogany desk, feeling the cool surface beneath my fingers. Mark thinks he has power because he has my black card in his wallet, but real power is knowing the exact moment to shut it down. My father always said that the most dangerous weapon in the world is a quiet woman with a plan. For years I stayed silent, hoping Mark would prove me wrong, hoping he would value me more than my money. But seeing him with Tiffany at the boutique today was the final proof I needed. I opened my laptop and pulled up the master financial file. It was a masterpiece of legal architecture. I had mapped out every forged signature Mark had used to try and leverage our house. I had every recorded conversation where Evelyn plotted to have me committed to a mental facility so they could take over my estate. Mark thinks I'm a victim of his gaslighting, but in reality, he is the one living in a fantasy world. He thinks he is moving toward a life of luxury with Tiffany, but he is actually moving toward a federal courtroom. In the United States, bankruptcy and financial fraud aren't just civil matters when you cross the lines I've watched him cross. I looked at the clock. It was nearly 2 in the morning. In a few days, we will be in the thin, cold air of Aspen. Mark and Evelyn are expecting a coronation. They are expecting to parade their stolen wealth in front of the world while I play the dutiful, broken wife. They have no idea that the mountain resort is actually the stage for their total annihilation. I have already coordinated with the local authorities and the private security team Maya and Jordan helped me assemble. The moment the gala begins, the trap will snap shut. Mark thinks he knows me, but he only knows the version of me I allowed him to see. He sees the lawyer who follows the rules. He doesn't see the daughter of Silas Vance who knows how to break the people who try to break her. He thinks he has outsmarted me, but he is just a man standing on a trap door holding a heavy bag of stolen gold, and I am the one with the lever. The shadows of the past are finally catching up to him, and the price of his betrayal is going to be everything he ever cared about. Before I reveal what happens when we land at the private terminal in Colorado, and Mark sees who is actually waiting for him on the tarmac, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought they were smarter than you? How did it feel when you finally proved them wrong? Leave a comment below and tell me your story. Your support helps me keep sharing these truths. Get ready, because the cold wind in Aspen is about to blow their house of cards down for good. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where the real Brooklyn Vance finally stands up and takes back her life. The thin mountain air of Aspen was supposed to be refreshing, but for me, it felt like the calm before a devastating storm. We had just checked into the presidential suite at the Little Nell, and the sheer audacity of Mark and Evelyn was reaching a fever pitch. While Mark was busy commanding the bellhops, and Evelyn was criticizing the thread count of the linens, my phone vibrated with a notification that wasn't a bank alert. It was a direct message from Tiffany. I opened the message to find a high-resolution image of an ultrasound. Below it, the text read, "Happy anniversary, Brooklyn. Mark thought you should be the first to know that our little miracle is growing perfectly. He says he can't wait to finally have a real family once he's done with the legal paperwork. Don't be too sad at the party tonight. It's better this way." I stared at the black and white grainy image on the screen. Most women in my position would have collapsed. Most would have screamed or confronted their husband in the middle of the lobby. But I am not most women. I am a woman trained to look for discrepancies in the fine print. I sat down at the vanity, zoomed in on the edges of the ultrasound photo, and spotted the first red flag. The timestamp in the corner was slightly blurred, and the hospital name at the top was from a clinic in Miami that had been shut down for insurance fraud 2 years ago. Tiffany wasn't just a mistress, she was a con artist. And she was currently trying to con a woman whose entire career was built on exposing liars. I didn't cry. I didn't even get angry. I felt a surge of professional excitement. I opened my laptop and bypassed the standard firewall to access the National Medical Registry database, a tool I often use to verify disability claims in major corporate bankruptcy cases. Within minutes, I had Tiffany's real medical history pulled up. There was no pregnancy. In fact, she had undergone a voluntary tubal ligation 3 years prior. She was physically incapable of being pregnant with Mark's child. I leaned back in the velvet chair and let out a soft, cold laugh. Tiffany was playing a dangerous game. She was using a fake pregnancy to pressure Mark into stealing my trust fund faster, and Mark, in his desperate vanity, was falling for it hook, line, and sinker. He was so eager to have an heir to his supposed empire that he didn't even ask for a blood test. He was committing federal crimes to fund a future that didn't even exist. Just then, Mark walked into the bedroom, smelling of expensive cologne and deception. He looked at me in the mirror, his expression a mix of pity and impatience. "You look pale, Brooklyn. Are you sure you're up for the gala tonight? If you're going to be a wet blanket, maybe you should just stay in the room and let me and Mom handle the guests." I turned to look at him, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. "I'm fine, Mark. I just received a very interesting message from a business associate. It gave me a lot to think about. I think tonight is going to be a very revealing evening for everyone." Mark stiffened for a second, his eyes darting to my phone. "Oh, well, just make sure you're wearing the jewelry I picked out. We need to look successful. Appearance is everything in this town." "Appearance certainly is everything," I agreed, watching him walk away. I spent the next hour coordinating with Maya and Jordan. Jordan had tracked Tiffany's recent bank activity and found that she was receiving large cash payments from a man in Las Vegas, a known associate of the gambling ring Mark was indebted to. Tiffany wasn't just Mark's mistress, she was the bait. She had been planted in his life by his creditors to ensure he kept funneling money from my estate into their pockets. Mark wasn't the mastermind he thought he was. He was the mark. I looked at the ultrasound photo one last time before deleting it from my phone. Tiffany thought she was being bold. She thought sending that photo would break my spirit and make me sign over the remaining house deeds in a fit of despair. She underestimated the fact that a lawyer doesn't move on emotion, a lawyer moves on evidence. While Evelyn was in the other room bragging to the event coordinator about the 5-tiered cake I was paying for, I was finalizing the digital dossier that would be projected onto the screens during the gala's keynote presentation. I included Tiffany's real medical records, the closure notice of the Miami fraud clinic, and the wire transfer logs connecting her to the Vegas gambling syndicate. The boldness of a mistress is usually built on the assumption that the wife is too humiliated to look closer. Tiffany assumed I would be too blinded by the betrayal to see the fraud. She forgot that I have spent a decade looking into the darkest corners of people's financial lives. She forgot that in the world of high-stakes litigation, the person with the most secrets is the one with the most to lose. As I began to get dressed for the gala, putting on a floor-length emerald silk gown that made me look like a weapon, I heard Mark and Evelyn laughing in the hallway. They were talking about the yacht they planned to buy next month. They were talking about the life they would lead once I was out of the picture. I stood in front of the full-length mirror and adjusted my necklace. Tiffany thought she was the one holding the winning hand. Mark thought he was the king of the mountain. But I was the one who owned the mountain, the resort, and the very air they were breathing. The gala was about to begin, and the guests were already arriving in the ballroom downstairs. The elite of the business world, the people Mark wanted so desperately to impress, were all gathered. They were about to witness the most spectacular bankruptcy in the history of New York high society. Not a bankruptcy of money, but a bankruptcy of character. I picked up my clutch and walked toward the door. I could hear the distant sound of the orchestra playing. The stage was set, the evidence was locked and loaded, and Tiffany's boldness was about to become her greatest liability. Before I walk into that ballroom and change the course of all our lives, I want to ask you something. If you found out that the person destroying your marriage was also part of a larger criminal plot to steal your life's work, would you just walk away, or would you make sure they never had the chance to hurt anyone else again? Let me know in the comments below. Hit that like button if you're ready to see the truth come out. The gala is starting, and I promise you the payoff is going to be more than anyone bargained for. Stay tuned, because the next chapter is where the hammer finally falls. The thin mountain air of Aspen usually brings clarity, but for my mother-in-law, Evelyn, it only seemed to fuel her delusions of grandeur. We were less than 24 hours away from the gala, and the greed radiating off her was almost palpable. I was sitting in the quiet corner of the resort lounge sipping a tea and reviewing the digital ledgers when I saw a notification from the GPS tracking system on my McLaren 720S back in Connecticut. The car had just been moved from my garage. Even more interesting, a digital title transfer request had been initiated through an offshore portal Mark frequently used for his shady business dealings. I didn't have to guess who was behind it. Evelyn had spent the entire morning talking about how Tiffany needed a vehicle that matched her new elevated status. She truly believed that because I had played the part of the submissive wife for a few days, she could now simply start redistributing my property like candy. I watched the screen as the car was driven to a private lot near the airport. Within minutes, I received a smug text from Evelyn that simply said, "A family is about sharing Brooklyn. Don't worry about the car, it's being put to better use by someone who actually knows how to enjoy life." Most people would have picked up the phone and screamed. Most would have raced to confront her in the hotel lobby. But I just leaned back and watched the blinking blue dot on the map. Evelyn hadn't just taken a car. She had committed grand theft auto and used a forged digital signature to attempt a fraudulent title transfer. As a lawyer, I knew exactly what this meant. This wasn't just a family squabble anymore. This was a felony. I didn't call Evelyn. I didn't call Mark. Instead, I opened my laptop and contacted the Connecticut State Police through their priority reporting line. I provided my owner credentials, the real-time GPS coordinates of the vehicle, and the recorded security footage from my garage showing a hired driver taking the car under Evelyn's direct supervision. I made sure to emphasize that I had not authorized anyone to move the vehicle and that the title transfer was a result of identity theft. The officer on the other end was professional and efficient. He confirmed that they were dispatching a unit to the location immediately and that the vehicle would be impounded as evidence in a criminal investigation. I thanked him and hung up. The trap was getting tighter, and Evelyn was the one who had walked right into it. She thought she was being clever by gifting my car to her son's mistress, but she was actually handing the police a silver platter with her fingerprints all over it. I walked back to our suite and found Evelyn lounging on the sofa looking incredibly pleased with herself. She looked at me with a condescending smile. "Oh, Brooklyn, you look so stressed. You really should learn to let go of material things. They are just objects after all. A generous heart is what truly matters in high society." I smiled back a calm and genuine smile that seemed to confuse her. "You're absolutely right, Evelyn. Material things can be so fleeting. One moment you think you own something, and the next it's just gone. It's a very important lesson in life. I'm glad we are on the same page about the importance of following the law and respecting boundaries." Evelyn chuckled clearly, thinking she had won another round. "I'm glad you're finally growing up," she said, turning her attention back to her fashion magazines. I went into the bedroom and checked the update from Jordan. The police had already intercepted the car. They had found the forged documents in the glove box, and the driver had immediately pointed the finger at Evelyn and Mark. Because the value of the McLaren exceeded $200,000, this was now a first-degree larceny charge. Mark walked in a few minutes later looking agitated. He was on the phone whispering urgently. I could hear snippets of the conversation. "What do you mean the lot is blocked?" "No, that's impossible. Just get the car moved." He hung up and looked at me, his eyes filled with suspicion. "Did you do something with the McLaren, Brooklyn?" I looked up from my book, my expression one of perfect innocence. The McLaren. Why would I do anything with it? It's in the garage in Connecticut, isn't it? Is something wrong, Mark? You look like you've seen a ghost. Mark opened his mouth to say something, then closed it. He couldn't admit he was trying to steal it without exposing the whole plot. He just growled and walked out, his hands shaking. He was starting to realize that the ground beneath his feet was no longer stable. He could feel the cold wind of reality beginning to blow, but he was still too arrogant to realize it was me who had turned on the fan. By dinner time, the atmosphere in the suite was tense. Evelyn was complaining about a headache, and Mark was constantly checking his messages, his face getting paler by the minute. They didn't know that the local police in Aspen had already been notified by the Connecticut authorities and were waiting for the final green light to serve the warrants. I sat there calmly eating my salad, listening to them bicker about the gala's seating chart. They were so focused on the tiny details of their social triumph that they were completely oblivious to the massive legal landslide that was about to bury them. Every time Evelyn bragged about her influence or Mark mentioned his future plans with Tiffany, I just felt a deep sense of satisfaction. They had underestimated me for 5 years, treating me like a boring, predictable bank account. They never realized that a bankruptcy lawyer is a master of the endgame. Evelyn leaned over the table, her eyes glittering with greed. "Brooklyn, I've decided that, after the gala, we should all take a trip to Paris. I've already looked at some apartments we could buy near the Champs-Élysées. The trust can certainly afford a small pied-à-terre for the family. Don't you think?" I wiped my mouth with a silk napkin and looked her directly in the eye. "Paris sounds lovely, Evelyn. But I think you might find your travel options very limited in the near future. Life has a funny way of confining us when we least expect it." Mark froze his fork halfway to his mouth. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means that tonight is the last night of the life you thought you were living," I said softly, my voice filled with a calm power that silenced the room. "I hope you enjoyed the shopping, the cars, and the lies. Because tomorrow, the bill comes due. And I'm the only one who knows exactly how much you owe." Before I tell you about the moment the police walked into the VIP pre-party and Evelyn tried to hide behind a rack of champagne, I want to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had a relative try to steal from you while acting like they were doing you a favor? How did you handle the betrayal? Let me know in the comments below. Make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss the final payoff. The gala is just hours away, and the ending is something you will have to see to believe. Stay tuned because the daughter of Silas Vance is about to show everyone exactly what happens when you try to steal from her empire. The suite in Aspen was filled with the sound of Mark popping champagne corks and Evelyn barking orders at the catering staff. They were celebrating their supposed victory, believing they had successfully bullied me back into submission. Mark stood by the window looking out at the snow-capped peaks, looking every bit like the successful tech mogul he pretended to be. He didn't know that every breath he took in this high-altitude paradise was being subsidized by a debt structure he didn't even understand. He was celebrating on top of a mountain of financial gunpowder, and I was the one holding the match. I slipped into the guest bedroom and locked the door, pulling out my secure laptop. My brother-in-law Jordan was already on the encrypted line waiting for my signal. Jordan had spent the last 48 hours working with a team of forensic accountants to finalize the acquisition of the secondary debt markers for Mark's company, Zenith Solutions. Mark had spent years borrowing from private lenders to cover his operational losses, hiding the true state of his business from everyone, including me. He thought he was being clever by using high-interest bridge loans to keep the lights on while he funded his lifestyle with my trust fund. Brooklyn. We have the final signatures. Jordan's voice came through the speakers, calm and steady. Every single one of Mark's outstanding business loans has been consolidated under the holding company we set up. You are officially his primary creditor. You don't just own his company's debt, you own the rights to his intellectual property, his office lease, and even the trademark to the name Zenith. If you pull the plug now, he doesn't just go out of business, he loses his entire professional identity. I looked at the spreadsheets on my screen. The numbers were staggering. Mark had leveraged everything. He had even tried to use my future inheritance as a form of collateral in a series of side agreements with some very unsavory characters in Jersey. By buying up these specific debts, I wasn't just trapping him. I was protecting my own assets from being dragged down in his inevitable collapse. I was the firewall between his greed and my father's legacy. Finalize the bankruptcy petition, Jordan, I said, my voice cold and focused. File it under the emergency provision for insolvent corporations with suspected internal fraud. By the time the markets open on Monday, Zenith Solutions will be under court receivership. I want the injunction served to him during the keynote speech tomorrow night. I want the world to see the exact moment his house of cards falls. You've got it, Brooklyn, Jordan replied. But remember, once this is filed, there's no going back. He's going to realize that every penny he's been spending this weekend has been effectively borrowed from you. He's going to be desperate. I know, I said, looking at the door where I could hear Mark laughing in the other room. Let him be desperate. He spent 10 years making me feel like I was a supporting character in his life. It's time he learns what happens when the lead actress walks off the set and takes the stage with her. I spent the next hour reviewing the legal net we had woven. It was a masterpiece of litigation. Because Mark had used corporate funds to pay for Evelyn's personal shopping sprees and Tiffany's luxury travel, he had pierced the corporate veil. This meant that his personal assets, which he thought were shielded, were now fair game for his creditors. And since I was the lead creditor, I would be the one taking possession of everything. The cars, the watches, the designer suits he was currently wearing, they all belonged to the estate now. Mark knocked on the door, his voice booming with a fake warmth that made my stomach turn. Brooklyn, honey, come out and have a drink. The investors are calling and they want to know if we are ready for the big reveal tomorrow. This gala is going to change everything for us. We are going to be on the cover of every business magazine in New York. I closed my laptop and took a deep breath, composing my face into a mask of weary support. I'm coming, Mark, I called out. I'm just finishing some emails. You're right. Tomorrow is going to be a day we never forget. I walked back into the living area. Evelyn was draped in a fur throw, looking at a catalog of yachts. She looked up at me with a condescending smirk. You really should try to enjoy yourself more, Brooklyn. All that work is making you look old. Once Mark's new funding goes through tomorrow, you can finally retire and just be a proper wife. We won't need your little law firm anymore. I smiled a slow, deliberate smile. You're right, Evelyn. After tomorrow, everything is going to be very different. I won't have to worry about the firm at all. I think we're all going to find a lot of free time on our hands very soon. Mark raised his glass to me, completely oblivious to the fact that he was effectively toast. To the future, he said, his eyes glittering with greed. To the truth, I replied, my glass clinking against his. That night, as the resort slept, I sat on the balcony watching the snow fall. The legal net was tight. The trap was set. Jordan had confirmed the filing was successful. Mark was currently a dead man walking, financially speaking. He was celebrating a success that was actually a massive, insurmountable failure. He thought he was the hunter, but he had spent the last 5 years walking deeper and deeper into a forest I owned, and the trees were starting to close in. The gala was less than 12 hours away. The elite of the business world were already arriving, preparing to toast to a man who was already bankrupt. Tiffany was probably in her hotel room nearby, dreaming of the life she was going to steal from me. Evelyn was dreaming of her Paris apartment, and I was the only one who knew that the only thing they were going to get was a front row seat to their own destruction. Before I tell you about the moment Mark walks onto that stage and realizes the teleprompter has been replaced with his own bankruptcy filing, I want to hear from you. Have you ever worked silently behind the scenes to protect yourself from someone who was trying to sabotage you? Did you feel guilty for keeping the secret, or did you feel empowered? Let me know in the comments below. Your stories of resilience are what keep me going. Make sure to like and subscribe, because the grand reveal is finally here, and I promise you it is even more satisfying than you can imagine. The daughter of Silas Vance doesn't just win, she ensures that the truth is the final word. Stay tuned for the climax of the year. The little Nell in Aspen was transformed into a glittering palace of ice and gold for our 10th anniversary gala. Outside, the Colorado wind howled against the glass, but inside the air was thick with the scent of $1,000 orchids and the heavy perfume of the American elite. This was the moment Evelyn had been preparing for her entire life. She moved through the ballroom like a self-appointed queen, her neck draped in the diamond tennis necklace she thought I had paid for, and her face stretched tight with a smug, triumphant grin. She was holding a glass of vintage Cristal, stopping every few feet to brag to the wives of tech CEOs and hedge fund managers about her son's visionary leadership and their family's boundless generosity. "Look at all this," Evelyn cooed to a group of socialites from Greenwich. Mark and I wanted to make sure Brooklyn felt celebrated for once. It is so hard for her, being a lawyer for failed companies. It is such a depressing, low-class world. We felt it was our duty to bring her back into the light of high society. Mark has been working so hard to fund this lifestyle for her. I stood near the edge of the dance floor, dressed in my emerald green gown, watching the scene with a cold, detached precision. I could see Tiffany in the corner wearing a gown that cost more than most people's annual salary, whispering in Mark's ear. Mark looked radiant, or at least as radiant as a man standing on a trapdoor can look. He was shaking hands, accepting congratulations for a success that was actually a hollow shell. He felt invincible. He felt like the king of the mountain. Maya moved through the crowd near me, dressed in an elegant black jumpsuit, carrying a tablet that looked like a digital guest list. She caught my eye and gave a subtle nod. The systems were live. Every camera in the room, every microphone hidden in the floral arrangements was feeding directly into our secure server. The grand ballroom was more than a party, it was a recording studio for their downfall. "Brooklyn. Dear, come here," Evelyn shouted across the room, beckoning me over with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Tell Mrs. Montgomery about the new wing we are planning to add to the Connecticut house. You should be so grateful that Mark is willing to invest so much in your comfort." I walked over my heels, clicking on the polished marble. I smiled at Mrs. Montgomery, a woman whose husband's firm I knew was actually considering suing Mark for breach of contract next week. "It is a very ambitious plan, Evelyn," I said, my voice smooth and calm. "Mark is certainly focused on building something that will last, though I think the final design might surprise everyone. Evelyn chuckled, patting my arm with a condescending touch. She's always so mysterious, she said to the group. I suppose that's what happens when you spend your life around bankrupt people. You forget how to just enjoy the brilliance of success. The orchestra began to play a soaring, triumphant piece, and Mark stepped onto the small stage at the head of the ballroom. He tapped the microphone and the room fell silent. The elite of New York and Aspen turned their eyes toward him, expecting a speech about love, longevity, and the bright future of Zenith Solutions. Mark looked at me, a fake, loving smile on his face. 10 years ago, I made a promise to a woman who has been by my side through everything. He began, his voice booming with a practiced confidence. Brooklyn tonight isn't just about us. It is about the legacy we are building. It is about the fact that no matter what challenges we face, the Vance family and Zenith Solutions stand stronger than ever. I watched him from the front row. I could feel Evelyn standing right behind me, her hand resting heavily on my shoulder, as if to claim ownership of the moment. I could see Tiffany at the side of the stage blowing a secret kiss to my husband. They all thought this was the peak of their climb. They didn't realize that the thin air of Aspen was about to become impossible to breathe. Mark continued his speech, getting more grand and delusional with every sentence. We are looking at an expansion that will triple our footprint by next year. We are bringing in new partners, new capital, and a new vision. And I want to thank my mother Evelyn for her unwavering support and her eye for the finer things that make life worth living. A smattering of polite applause rippled through the room. Evelyn beamed, standing taller, basking in the reflected glory of her son's lies. She whispered in my ear, "Stay quiet and look pretty, Brooklyn. This is Mark's night. Don't ruin it with your usual dullness." I didn't respond. I just looked at the massive screens behind Mark, which were currently displaying a rotating slideshow of our wedding photos and shots of the Connecticut estate. The transition was about to happen. Maya had the remote override ready. Mark raised his glass. To the future, he toasted. The room echoed the toast, hundreds of crystal glasses clinking in the soft light. But as the guests took their first sip of champagne, the music suddenly cut out. The screens behind Mark flickered for a second, then went black. A confused murmur ran through the crowd. Mark turned around, frowning at the tech booth. "Just a small technical glitch," he laughed, trying to maintain his composure. "We'll have it back up in a second." But it wasn't a glitch. The screens roared back to life, but they weren't showing wedding photos anymore. They were showing a high-definition document with a red stamp that read, U.S. Bankruptcy Court District of Connecticut, Emergency Filing Zenith Solutions. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like the walls were closing in. Mark froze his glass halfway to his mouth. Evelyn's hand dropped from my shoulder, her fingers trembling. The crowd gasped as the screen began to scroll, showing the list of Mark's outstanding debts, his forged signatures, and the notice of court receivership. And then the audio kicked in. It wasn't the orchestra. It was a recording from the suite upstairs, Mark's voice, clear and unmistakable, talking to Tiffany. "Don't worry about the wife, she's just an ATM. Once I get her to sign the final equity release at the gala, we are taking the trust fund and heading to the islands. She's too stupid to see it coming." The ballroom erupted into a chaos of whispers and shocked stares. Evelyn let out a strangled gasp, her face turning a ghastly shade of gray. "Brooklyn, turn it off!" Mark screamed, jumping off the stage and lunging toward me. "Turn it off right now." I didn't move. I stood my ground as the socialites and investors he had spent all night trying to impress began to back away from him as if he were radioactive. The queen of the ballroom was now just an old woman in stolen diamonds, and the tech mogul was just a fraud in a custom tuxedo. I looked at Mark, my voice cold and clear, cutting through the noise of the room. "The party is over, Mark. The gala is canceled. And by the way, the resort just received notice that your primary credit line has been revoked. I hope you have another way to pay for all this because, as of 5 minutes ago, I am no longer your wife. I am your lead creditor." Evelyn tried to step forward, her voice a shrill, desperate shriek. "You can't do this. This is our family. You are destroying us." I turned to her, my expression one of perfect icy calm. I didn't destroy this family, Evelyn. You and Mark sold it piece by piece to fund a life you didn't earn. I'm just the lawyer here to collect what's left of the wreckage. Before I tell you what happens when the security team steps in and Mark realizes that Tiffany has already vanished into the crowd, I want to hear your reaction. What would you do if you were standing in that ballroom and saw your husband's betrayal projected for the whole world to see? Would you stay and fight, or would you walk out with your head held high, like I did? Let me know in the comments below. Hit that like button if you think Mark and Evelyn got exactly what they deserved. Stay tuned, because the final payoff is about to get even more intense. The daughter of Silas Vance is just getting started. The ballroom was silent, the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that happens right before a building collapses. Mark stood on the stage, his face frozen in a mask of confusion and growing terror as he stared at the federal bankruptcy filing displayed on the massive screens. But I wasn't done. A financial ruin was just the beginning. I wanted everyone in this room to see the rot beneath the polished surface of the Vance family name. I gave a slight nod to Maya, who was stationed at the back of the room. With a single keystroke, the legal documents vanished and were replaced by a video feed that looked like it was taken from a security camera in the master suite of our Aspen hotel. The audio hissed for a second before becoming crystal clear. On the giant screens, the guests saw Evelyn and Tiffany sitting on the plush velvet sofa in our suite, surrounded by designer shopping bags. They weren't whispering. They were laughing with a cruel, unchecked arrogance that echoed through the ballroom. "Do you think she suspects anything?" Tiffany's voice rang out, her tone dripping with contempt. "She looks so pathetic running around trying to make this party perfect while we're planning her exit." Evelyn let out a sharp, mocking cackle as she reached into her luxury handbag. "Brooklyn is a fool, Tiffany. She thinks her law degree makes her smart, but she's blinded by her need for Mark's love. She actually thinks this gala is a fresh start. She has no idea that once the paperwork for the equity release is signed tonight, we won't need her anymore." The crowd in the ballroom gasped. I could see Mark's knees literal tremble as he watched his mother betray their darkest secrets to 300 of the most influential people in the country. But the video continued, getting even darker. "What if she refuses to sign?" Tiffany asked, leaning forward. "She's been acting a bit strange lately." Evelyn smiled, a slow, sinister expression that made several people in the front row recoil. "That's why I brought these," she said, holding up a small, amber prescription bottle. "A double dose of her usual sleep aid and her pre-gala champagne will make her very agreeable. She'll be so groggy she'll sign whatever Mark puts in front of her. And if she doesn't wake up for a while, well, that just gives us more time to secure the trust assets. We can always claim she had a breakdown from the stress of Mark's business troubles." The ballroom was no longer just silent, it was horrified. The elite of Aspen and New York people who valued decorum above all else were watching a cold-blooded conspiracy to drug and rob a woman in real time. Evelyn stood in the center of the room, her face turning a ghastly translucent white. She tried to speak, but only a dry wheezing sound came out of her throat. Mark turned toward me, his eyes wide with a desperate animalistic fear. "Brooklyn, that's not what it looks like. It was a joke. We were just venting." I stepped forward into the light of the stage, my emerald gown shimmering like cold fire. "A joke, Mark. You think discussing how to drug your wife to steal her father's legacy is a joke?" I looked around the room at the guests, many of whom were already pulling out their phones to record the scene. "You all saw it," I said, my voice amplified by the ballroom's sound system, steady and unshakable. "You saw the greed. You saw the malice. And most importantly, you saw the evidence. I didn't drink the champagne tonight, Evelyn, but I did make sure the hotel's security team recovered that bottle from your bedside table 10 minutes ago. It's already been handed over to the authorities as evidence of attempted aggravated assault and conspiracy." Evelyn let out a shriek that sounded more like a wounded animal than a high society matron. "You ungrateful brat, we made you. You would be nothing without this family." I turned to her, my expression one of perfect clinical detachment. "No, Evelyn, You spent 5 years trying to unmake me, but you forgot that I am Silas Vance's daughter. I don't just survive, I litigate. At that exact moment, the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. 4 uniformed officers from the Aspen Police Department, followed by 2 investigators in suits, marched down the center aisle. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. They weren't there for a noise complaint. They were there for the people on the stage. Tiffany, who had been trying to blend into the shadows near the bar, suddenly turned and bolted toward the service exit. But Jordan was already there, blocking her path with a calm, imposing presence. "You're not going anywhere, Tiffany," he said, his voice echoing through the hall. "We have a lot to talk about regarding that fake ultrasound and those wire transfers from Las Vegas." Mark collapsed onto the stage, burying his face in his hands as the lead officer stepped up and read him his rights. Evelyn was next. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrinkled wrists, she looked at the diamond necklace she was wearing, the one she thought was her trophy. "Wait!" she screamed as they began to lead her away. "This necklace is mine. It's a family heirloom." I walked over to her and looked at the glittering stones. "Actually, Evelyn, that's a high-quality cubic zirconia replica I had made last week. The real diamonds are currently being appraised to pay off the first installment of the back taxes Mark owes. You're wearing exactly what you are, a fake." The police led them out of the ballroom in total silence. The gala that was supposed to be their coronation had become their public execution. I stood alone on the stage, looking out at the stunned faces of the guests. I didn't feel happy, but I felt a profound sense of weightlessness. The chains of their gaslighting and greed had finally snapped. Maya stepped up beside me and squeezed my hand. "It's over, Brooklyn. They're gone." I looked at the empty stage where my husband had just been standing. "Not yet, Maya. Now comes the part where I take back every single thing they thought they stole." Before I tell you what happened when I walked into the police station the next morning and saw Mark begging for a phone call, I want to hear your thoughts. What was the most shocking part of the video bomb for you? Was it the mistress's arrogance or the mother-in-law's plan to drug me? Let me know in the comments below. Hit that like button if you've ever seen a villain get exactly what was coming to them. Stay tuned, because the daughter of Silas Vance is about to show you how she cleans up the wreckage and builds a new empire from the ashes. The final payoff is just beginning. The chaos in the Aspen ballroom was absolute. The video of Evelyn and Tiffany plotting to drug me was still flickering on the giant screens, casting a ghostly light over the stunned faces of the New York elite. Mark stood in the center of the stage, his hands trembling so violently that the champagne glass he was holding shattered on the floor. He looked at me with a mixture of rage and sheer disbelief. He tried to take a step toward me, his face twisted into a snarl that made him look like a stranger. "You bitch!" Mark hissed, his voice cracking through the silence of the room. "You think you can just embarrass us like this? You think you can just play with our lives? I am your husband. I have legal rights to everything you own. That trust fund is half mine, and I'm going to make sure you never see a dime of it after I'm through with you in court." Evelyn, still struggling in the grip of the officers, at the edge of the stage, screamed at the top of her lungs. "Mark, don't let her do this. She's crazy. Tell them she's unstable. She's been hallucinating these things. Brooklyn, you will pay for this. You are nothing without the Vance name." I didn't flinch. I didn't even raise my voice. I reached into my small silk clutch and pulled out a thick, official-looking envelope. I walked slowly up the steps of the stage, the click of my heels echoing like a countdown. Mark backed away, his bravado crumbling as I approached. I reached the podium and slammed the documents down onto the marble surface right in front of him. "You talk about rights, Mark," I asked, my voice amplified by the microphone, cold and lethal. "Then let's talk about the law. You think you've been spending my money for the last week? You haven't. You've been spending credit that I personally guaranteed as a loan to your company, Zenith Solutions. And because I am the primary creditor of that company, I called in those loans at 8 a.m. this morning." Mark's eyes darted to the papers. He grabbed the top sheet, his breath hitching as he read the bold letters at the top. Notice of asset seizure and foreclosure. What is this? He stammered, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. This can't be real. Oh, it's very real, I said, leaning in, so only he could see the utter lack of mercy in my eyes. The black card in your pocket. It was deactivated an hour ago, the penthouse in Manhattan. The locks were changed at noon, the villa in Greenwich. It's currently being sealed by the county sheriff as part of the bankruptcy proceedings for Zenith. You aren't just broke, Mark. You are homeless. Evelyn let out a shriek of denial, but I turned to look at her, my expression one of icy finality. And Evelyn, those storage units where you've been hiding the antique silver and the jewelry Mark stole from my mother's estate. My team found them yesterday. Everything has been inventoried and seized. You wanted to live like a queen on a stolen throne, but you forgot that the queen doesn't own the kingdom. The person with the deeds does. Tiffany tried to shout something from the back of the room as Jordan led her toward the waiting police cruisers, but her voice was drowned out by the collective gasp of the crowd. Mark looked around the room at the people he had spent years trying to impress. He saw the judgment, the disgust, and the mockery in their eyes. He realized that in a single swipe of a digital pen, I had erased his entire identity. I am a bankruptcy lawyer, Mark. I whispered loud enough for the microphone to catch. My entire career is built on knowing exactly when a house of cards is about to fall. I've been watching yours wobble for 5 years. I just finally decided to give it the push it deserved. Mark lunged at me, a desperate, pathetic attempt to regain some sense of control, but the security team Maya had hired stepped in instantly. They pinned him to the floor of the stage, his custom tuxedo ripping at the seams. As he lay there sobbing and cursing my name, I felt a profound sense of peace. The man who had tried to gaslight me into believing I was worthless was now literally groveling at my feet. I looked out at the guests, the wealthy and powerful, who had watched the whole drama unfold. I picked up my glass of untouched sparkling water and raised it in a silent toast. The gala is over, I announced, my voice steady and clear. But for me, the real work is just beginning. I walked off the stage without looking back at the wreckage of my marriage. I could hear Evelyn screaming for her lawyer and Mark begging the police for a phone call, but their voices felt small and distant, like static on a radio I had finally turned off. I walked out of the ballroom and into the cold, crisp Aspen night. Maya and Jordan were waiting by the SUV, their faces filled with a quiet, hard-won pride. "Is it done?" Jordan asked as he opened the door for me. "It's done," I replied, sitting back into the leather seat. "The accounts are frozen, the assets are secured, and the truth is on the front page of every digital news outlet in the state." They thought they could bury me in their lies, but they forgot I know how to dig. As we drove away from the resort, I looked back at the lights of the Little Nell. For 10 years I had tried to fit into a world that wanted to consume me. I had let them treat me like an ATM because I thought that was the price of a family. But standing on that stage tonight, I realized that the greatest wealth I ever possessed wasn't the trust fund or the deeds. It was the courage to say enough. Mark and Evelyn had spent their lives worshiping the black card, believing it made them invincible. They never understood that a card is just plastic. The real power is the person whose name is embossed on it. And my name isn't Vance anymore. I am Brooklyn, the daughter of Silas Vance, and I just took back my empire. Before I show you the final confrontation at the precinct and the secret Tiffany was holding that even the police didn't see coming, I want to hear from you. Have you ever reached a breaking point where you finally stood up and said no more? How did it feel to finally take back your power? Let me know in the comments below. Hit that like button if you think Mark and Evelyn deserve everything that's coming to them. Subscribe to see the final payoff, because the wreckage is still smoldering, and I am about to sweep away the ashes. Stay tuned, because the story isn't over until every debt is paid in full. The grand ballroom of the Little Nell was still echoing with the recorded voices of my husband and mother-in-law plotting my downfall. The socialites and investors stood frozen, clutching their champagne glasses as the reality of the situation sank in. Mark was standing in the middle of the stage, looking like a man who had just seen a ghost. His custom tuxedo, which he had spent thousands on just days ago, now looked like a straitjacket. He tried to take a step toward the side exit, but the heavy oak doors at the back of the room swung open with a force that silenced the remaining whispers. Four uniformed Aspen police officers, led by two investigators in sharp gray suits, marched down the center aisle. The crowd parted like the Red Sea as the lead investigator reached the stage. "Mark Vance," he said, his voice projected through the room with authority. "You are under arrest for multiple counts of insurance fraud, interstate wire fraud, and the illegal dissipation of marital assets." Mark's face went from pale to a ghostly translucent white. "This is a mistake," he stammered, his voice cracking. "My wife is just upset. This is a civil matter. You can't arrest me at my own anniversary party." The investigator didn't even blink. "It's not just a civil matter when you file a fraudulent insurance claim for a staged robbery at your Connecticut warehouse to cover your gambling debts, Mark. We have the forensic logs showing you accessed the security system from your mistress's laptop, and we have the testimony of the driver you hired to move the assets." I watched from the front row as the officers stepped onto the stage. One of them grabbed Mark's arm and spun him around. The metallic click of the handcuffs echoed through the ballroom, a sound more satisfying than any orchestra. Mark let out a pathetic whimpering sound as his hands were secured behind his back. The man who had spent 10 years trying to make me feel small was now being led away like a common criminal in front of every person he had ever wanted to impress. Evelyn let out a piercing shriek from the edge of the room. "You can't do this to him. Do you know who we are? We are the Vances. My son is a visionary. Brooklyn, you tell them you made it all up." She lunged toward me, her face twisted with a level of hatred that would have terrified me months ago. But now I simply stood my ground. The second investigator intercepted her before she could get within 5 feet of me. "Evelyn Vance, you are also being detained for questioning regarding conspiracy to commit assault and your involvement in the fraudulent transfer of property deeds." I looked at Evelyn as the officer gripped her shoulder. The diamond necklace she was wearing, the one she had bragged about all night, seemed to weigh her down. The greed that had defined her life was finally the anchor that was sinking her. "You wanted to be the center of attention tonight, Evelyn," I said quietly. "I hope the mugshots live up to your expectations." The crowd watched in stunned silence as Mark and Evelyn were escorted out of the ballroom. The elite of New York society. The people who had been laughing at Mark's jokes and drinking my champagne just minutes ago were now pulling out their phones to record the perp walk. Tiffany had vanished the moment the police entered, but I knew Jordan was waiting for her at the resort entrance. There was no escape. I turned to the lead investigator. "Thank you, Detective. Everything you need, the original ledgers, the recorded confessions, and the digital trail is on the encrypted drive I provided to your office this morning." He nodded respectfully. "You did a thorough job, counselor. Most people in your position would have just filed for divorce. You gave us a roadmap to a federal conviction." As the police cars screamed away into the snowy Aspen night, I stood in the center of the empty stage. The ballroom was starting to clear out, the guests whispering and scurrying away to avoid being associated with the scandal. I looked down at the broken glass on the floor, the wreckage of a life built on lies. For 10 years I had played the role of the supportive wife. I had forgiven the late nights, the unexplained expenses, and the coldness from a woman who was supposed to be my mother. I had allowed them to treat my father's hard-earned legacy like their personal playground because I was afraid of being alone. But as I watched the red and blue lights fade into the distance, I realized I had never been less alone in my life. I had my dignity, I had my truth, and I had the empire they thought they had stolen. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Maya. She looked at me with a soft, proud smile. "They're gone, Brooklyn. The net is closed." I took a deep breath of the cold mountain air, feeling the weight of the last decade finally lifting off my chest. "I know, Maya, but the arrest is just the beginning. Now I have to make sure they never have the chance to rebuild their house of cards ever again." Before I tell you about the final confrontation at the precinct and the hidden asset Mark tried to use as a last-ditch effort to buy his way out of jail. I want to hear from you. Have you ever seen someone's greed lead to their absolute public downfall? Did you feel a sense of justice, or did you feel pity for them? Let me know in the comments below. Hit that like button if you think Mark and Evelyn got exactly what was coming to them. Subscribe for the final chapter of this journey, because the daughter of Silas Vance is about to close the books on this family for good. Stay tuned for the payoff you've all been waiting for. The morning after the gala, the sun rose over the snow-capped peaks of Aspen with a cold, blinding light. But for Evelyn, the golden dream had turned into a frozen nightmare. I stood in the lobby of the Little Nell, watching from behind a marble pillar as the reality of her new life began to set in. Evelyn was standing at the front desk, still wearing the crumpled silk gown from the night before, looking like a ghost of the woman who had marched through the ballroom like royalty just hours earlier. Two burly security guards stood behind her, and the hotel manager, a man who had bowed to her only yesterday, now looked at her with a face as hard as stone. "I am sorry, Mrs. Vance," the manager said, his voice echoing through the quiet lobby. "But since the primary credit line on file has been revoked and the backup cards have all been declined, we cannot allow you to return to your suite. We have already packed your personal belongings into these two suitcases." Evelyn's voice was a shrill, desperate rasp. "You can't do this. Do you know how much money we have spent at this resort over the years? My son will have your job for this. It is just a bank error. Let me back into my room so I can call my lawyers." The manager didn't even flinch. He pushed a printed folio across the counter toward her. "The current outstanding balance for the anniversary gala, including the premium catering, the vintage champagne, and the specialized decor, stands at $212,000. Since you signed the initial guest agreement as a co-guarantor in the event of a corporate default, you are personally responsible for this debt. If it is not settled within the next hour, we will have no choice but to involve the local sheriff for theft of services." Evelyn looked at the number on the paper and her knees literally buckled. She reached out to steady herself against the counter, but the manager stepped back, avoiding her touch. She was a woman who had never looked at a price tag in a decade, and now she was staring at a debt that exceeded the value of everything she currently owned. I stepped out from behind the pillar, my heels clicking slowly on the polished floor. I didn't say anything at first. I just watched her. Evelyn turned and saw me, and for a second a spark of her old arrogance returned. "Brooklyn, thank God. Tell this man there has been a mistake. Give him your card. Fix this right now." I looked at her with a level of pity that was sharper than any insult. "I can't do that, Evelyn. I am the one who reported the unauthorized use of the trust funds. As the court-appointed receiver for Mark's liquidated assets, I am legally barred from paying for your personal debts. In fact, everything you are wearing right now, including that fur wrap, is technically an asset in dispute." Evelyn's hands flew to her neck, clutching the diamond tennis necklace she still had on. "This is mine. Mark gave it to me. Actually, the investigator from the insurance fraud unit is right behind me," I said, nodding toward a man in a dark suit standing near the entrance. "He is here to recover the jewelry you claimed was stolen 3 years ago. You know, the items you filed a $400,000 insurance claim on, but then decided to keep in your private safe. Since those items were used as collateral for Mark's latest gambling debt, they are being seized as part of the federal investigation." The investigator stepped forward and held out a velvet-lined box. "Mrs. Vance, I am going to need you to remove the necklace, the earrings, and that watch. If you refuse, I will have to take you back to the precinct and have them removed during processing." The sight of Evelyn Vance, high society matron and self-proclaimed Queen of Greenwich, being forced to strip off her jewelry in a hotel lobby was a payoff more satisfying than any court victory. Her hands were shaking so much she couldn't even undo the clasp of the necklace. The investigator had to help her. One by one, the glittering pieces were placed into the box. As the last diamond left her skin, she looked diminished, small, and incredibly old. "You did this?" she hissed, her eyes filled with a poisonous rage. "You planned this whole thing just to see me crawl." I leaned in close so only she could hear me. "I didn't make you greedy, Evelyn. I didn't make you plot to drug me or steal my father's house. I just stopped being the person who paid for your crimes. You wanted to live like a queen, but you forgot that a queen without a kingdom is just a woman with a very expensive habit. The manager signaled to the security guards. Please escort Mrs. Vance to the curb. Her luggage is already outside. Evelyn tried to maintain some shred of dignity as they led her toward the sliding glass doors, but it was gone. She was standing on the sidewalk of Aspen in a ruined gala dress, clutching two cheap suitcases surrounded by the very people she had looked down on her entire life. She had no money, no credit, and no home to return to because I had already authorized the locks to be changed on every property she had ever occupied. She looked at her phone, probably trying to call Tiffany or one of her socialite friends, but I knew no one would answer. In her world, once the money stops, the friendship ends. She was truly alone. I watched her through the glass as she sat down on her suitcase, a broken woman in a world that had no more room for her. As I walked toward the waiting SUV where Maya was waiting, I didn't look back. Evelyn had spent years making me feel like I was a guest in my own life. Now she was the one who was truly homeless, and she was learning that the hardest part of falling from grace is the cold, hard ground at the bottom. Before I show you the final scene where I visit Mark in his holding cell to deliver the final blow and the shocking truth Tiffany revealed to save herself, I want to hear from you. Do you think Evelyn deserved to be kicked out of the hotel like that, or was I too harsh? Have you ever had to cut off a greedy relative to save yourself? Let me know in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe for the grand finale of this journey, because the daughter of Silas Vance is about to turn the page on this chapter forever. Stay tuned for the ultimate payoff. 6 months had passed since the snow of Aspen settled over the wreckage of my marriage. I stood in the center of a sun-drenched penthouse in Manhattan, overlooking the very skyline my father had helped build. The air here was different. It was clean. It was mine. On the marble kitchen island lay a final thick envelope from the New York County clerk. I didn't need to open it to know what it said. The decree, absolute, was there. I was no longer Brooklyn Vance. I had legally reclaimed my maiden name. I was Brooklyn Silas once again, and with that name, I had reclaimed every cent of the legacy Mark and Evelyn had tried to bleed dry. My phone buzzed with a message from Jordan. He had been monitoring the final court proceedings in Connecticut. Mark's sentencing had been handed down that morning. 15 years in federal prison for racketeering, insurance fraud, and grand larceny. But that wasn't the news that made me pause. Jordan had sent a link to a local news report from the courthouse. In the video, Mark was being led out in his orange jumpsuit, looking gaunt and broken. He had just discovered the final truth during the victim impact statements. Tiffany, the woman he had risked everything for, had been called to testify. To save her own skin, she had turned state's evidence weeks ago. But the real blow came when the prosecution revealed the results of a court-ordered paternity test. The baby she was carrying, the heir Mark had been so desperate for, wasn't his. It belonged to a low-level associate of the gambling syndicate he owed money to. Mark had committed federal crimes and destroyed his life for a lie built on top of another lie. The footage showed him screaming in the hallway of the courthouse, his voice cracking as he realized he had lost his freedom for a child that wasn't even his. He had lost everything, and he had lost it to a woman who never loved him. I set the phone down and looked out at the Statue of Liberty in the distance. I felt a strange sense of closure. It wasn't the fiery vengeance I had imagined in the beginning. It was something much more powerful. It was the absolute silence of justice. Evelyn was currently living in a state-funded assisted living facility in New Jersey, her socialite friends having long since deleted her number. She had gone from cashmere and caviar to institutional meals and shared rooms. She had spent her life chasing a status she didn't earn, and now she had exactly what she deserved: nothing. Maya walked into the room carrying 2 glasses of chilled white wine. She looked around the empty penthouse and smiled. "It looks good on you, Brooklyn. The independence, the peace. I heard about Mark. He's officially lost his mind in there." I took the glass from her and felt the cool condensation against my palm. He didn't lose his mind, Maya. He just finally had to face the reality he spent a decade trying to outrun. He thought he was playing a game, but he didn't realize I was the one who owned the board. We walked out onto the terrace. The city was humming below us, a million stories unfolding at once. For years, I had been the lawyer who cleaned up other people's messes. I had been the wife who stayed quiet while her value was questioned. I had allowed myself to be gaslit into believing that my strength was a flaw. But standing here now, I realized that my profession wasn't just a job. It was my armor. It was the very thing that allowed me to survive the wolves in my own home. I thought about Tiffany, who was now back in Florida, probably looking for her next mark. I thought about the car she tried to steal and the diamonds Evelyn tried to hide. They all shared the same fatal flaw. They thought that greed was a substitute for intelligence. They thought that because I was patient, I was weak. The sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the Hudson River. I raised my glass to the city, to my father, and to the woman I had become in the fire of betrayal. My father was right about the bullets. You don't need a lot of them if you know exactly where to aim. Mark and Evelyn had handed me the ammunition, and I had simply waited for the perfect moment to pull the trigger. The trust fund was secure. The properties were back in my name. The company Mark had ruined had been liquidated, and the proceeds used to pay back the people he had defrauded. I had done more than just win a divorce. I had completed a total hostile takeover of my own life. I looked at Maya and we clinked glasses. In this world, especially in a city like New York, people will always try to tell you who you are. They will try to take your kindness for granted and your silence for permission, but they always forget one thing. In the world of law and in the world of life, the person who wins isn't the one who screams the loudest. It's the one who keeps a cold heart and a clear head. I am Brooklyn Silas. I am 30 years old. I am a daughter, a sister, and a survivor. And for the first time in my life, I am exactly where I am supposed to be. The ledger is balanced, the debts are paid, and the new chapter is just beginning. Thank you for following my story from the Hermes boutique on Fifth Avenue to the snowy peaks of Aspen, and finally back here to the heart of New York. Your support and your comments have been my strength during the darkest days of this battle. If you've learned anything from my journey, let it be this. Never let anyone make you feel small for being the one who follows the rules. Because when the rules are on your side, you are unstoppable. Hit that like button one last time and subscribe for more stories of resilience and justice. Remember that your worth is never determined by those who fail to see it. Keep your head high, keep your receipts, and always keep a cold head. My story is just getting started, and I can't wait to see where we go next. Thank you for being a part of my new beginning. The most profound lesson from Brooklyn's journey is that emotional resilience combined with professional expertise is the ultimate shield against betrayal. For 10 years, Brooklyn lived in the shadows of a family that viewed her kindness as a weakness and her silence as a blank check for their greed. However, she proved that being a victim is a temporary state, while being prepared is a permanent advantage. In the high-stakes world of modern society, the story teaches us that financial independence and legal literacy are not just career tools, they are essential for personal survival. Brooklyn didn't just react with anger, she reacted with a cold head. She understood that when dealing with narcissistic and toxic individuals like Mark and Evelyn, emotional outbursts only provide them with more ammunition for gaslighting. By maintaining her composure, she turned the tables, allowing her enemies to hang themselves with the very rope of greed they had woven. This underscores the importance of the shadow strategy: never reveal your full strength until the moment of maximum impact. In law, as in life, the person who controls the documentation controls the destiny. Furthermore, the story serves as a stark reminder that loyalty should never be blind. Brooklyn's realization that her family was actually a criminal syndicate operating under the guise of kinship is a painful but necessary truth. It highlights the necessity of setting boundaries and auditing the relationships in our lives. We learn that a person's true character is revealed not in how they treat you when they need you, but in how they treat you when they think they have already won. Ultimately, Brooklyn's triumph is a celebration of self-worth. She reclaimed her father's legacy not just for the money, but to honor the values of hard work and integrity that her family tried to spit on. She demonstrated that you can lose a husband, a home, and a reputation, but as long as you retain your strategic mind and your dignity, you can rebuild an empire from the ashes. The legal victory was just a formality. The real victory was Brooklyn finally deciding that she was enough. If Brooklyn's story of reclaiming her power resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the psychology of resilience and the triumph of justice. Don't let anyone else write the final chapter of your life.